Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
So now we jump into Neo-Chalcedonian Christology, which simply means what? So we have all of these councils culminating in the Council of Chalcedon in 451. So all of that is the formulation of all these doctrines of how it is that in order for us to be saved, we must be saved by one, Jesus, who is both God, because only God can save, and also human, because if we want to be saved, we have to be saved by one like us. So all these doctrines are being formulated through the Council of Chalcedon, and then from the Council of Chalcedon in 451 forward, for the next 1,500 years, there's really not a lot of advance in the world of Christology. Why? Because, like parrots, we simply say what it is that we've heard. And so the medieval scholastics, for instance, what are we going to hear from them? I mean, essentially how it is that we're going to hear this Chalcedonian Christology. How it is that Jesus is one guy in which there are two natures. We just want to be honest in acknowledging the limitations of this Neo-Chalcedonian Christology. First of all, as Karl Rahner so pointedly stated, that the meaning of words change over time. So what meant something to one group of people in one era may not mean the same thing to another group of people in another era, in another place. Which is why we say those words that were formulated in 4th century Turkey in the Greek language may not mean the same to us in 21st century U.S. English here in the state of Texas. So the meanings of words change over time and depend on context. And a lot of these words like hypostasis or ousia, when was the last time you used ousia in a sentence? Seriously now. When was the last time you used the word consubstantial in a sentence? Wow, Father Jamie's lesson last night was very consubstantial. Right? These are not words that we use. Right? And so we recognize, first of all, that limitation, how it is that words and doctrines change over time. Another limitation, how it is that the classical Christology of this patristic era, it's all based on Greek metaphysics, more so than on the Bible. So that when a person like Father Arius read the Bible, he was scoffed. They scoffed at him and condemned him and labeled him a heretic. Wow. So this, how it is that the theology that grew up is less biblical and more based on ideas that people had in their heads, mostly influenced by Greek metaphysics. Another criticism or limitation of Neo-Chalcedonian Christology of how it is that it's a classical Christology from above. What does that mean, to have a Christology from above? Christology from above, does that start with Jesus as a human being or Jesus as God? Jesus is God. So where did all of this start? What was the first council dealing with? The first council resolved Jesus' divinity. So we're going to start with the presupposition that Jesus is God, and then work down from there. Father Donald Bugger would argue, we're doing this the wrong way. Start with the human Jesus and go from there. Right? Our first premise was that Jesus is God, and then it was trying to figure out, okay, how do we justify this notion that Jesus is God? So it seems that Christology should end above and start below. So perhaps in light of that, perhaps we need to reinterpret various doctrines, whether that's our theology of God, our theology of the Trinity, our theology of the Incarnation, in light of this history, this rich, complex history of which we've spoken. Another limitation, medieval scholasticism. So in these medieval scholastics would simply repeat this theology, the hypostatic union, for centuries, and it would lose its soteriological inspiration. All this has to be rooted in our salvation. So we go from this, the Bible's all about this soteriological concern, that we believe in Christ that we might be saved. What happened over time? We shifted from the Bible to Greek metaphysics. Where did that put us? Another limitation, in classical Christology, Jesus isn't seen in the context of creation and history and salvation. Jesus is according to the Alexandrine school, Jesus is the eternally begotten Son of God. And that's the starting point for Christology. So Jesus is coming into our history. Is that really important? For them, what was important was that Jesus is the eternal Son of God. Another limitation, Karl Rahner said, wait a minute, these categories and words that we've been using are ontic rather than ontological. What's the difference? Ontic refers to impersonal categories that can be applied to all. Impersonal things like ousia, we were talking about the last time that you used the word ousia. When you use the word ousia, you can use that word of very impersonal things. Should Christology be an impersonal thing with such impersonal words? That's the question. Or should we be using more ontological categories, which are more existential or personal, you might say? Instead of talking about things like substance and being and persons and economic trinity, what if we were to start with other words like freedom and conscience and love? You know, those things that have some place in our own experience. Rahner, for instance, suggested that ousia, this Greek word for being, is an ontic category, this impersonal category. And instead, he was arguing that we need to take a look at the real Jesus. Rather than talking about Jesus as ousia, Jesus as being, let's talk about Jesus being a human like us with the freedom that humans have. And what does that mean? Do you see how it's a very different starting point for Christology? So Rahner was very much against mythological notions of Jesus as this logos jumping into a fleshly body or coming in human disguise or whatever words you want to use. Or, you know, how it is that God was speaking through Jesus. He was interested in Jesus, the human being like us, and how it is that Jesus, by being fully human, was divine. So for Rahner, the notion is, that we're going to see in a moment, how it is that humanity and divinity don't compete. It's not human versus divine. It's instead how it is that we become divine through our exercise of our humanity. And that's what happened in Jesus. Irenaeus, Rahner, for instance, go back to the early fathers of the church, people like Irenaeus, who said, the glory of God is the human being fully alive. Think about that for a moment. So if Jesus was a human being fully alive and fully loving others and including others, then Jesus was mirroring the face of God. Jesus was most divine in being most human. So for Rahner, this unity of the classical Christology, these abstract notions of divine and human, this is not helpful. This is not helpful at all. So, because for him, you know, we've been fixating on this abyss that lies between the human and divine, and how it is that Jesus is either on one side of the abyss or the other, or how he straddles the abyss or bridges the abyss. Wait a minute. It's time for us to come up with some new words to capture what it is that's going on here. And so rather than using all of this timeless, static, ahistorical words and concepts, let's take a look at Jesus' life and his decisions, his obedience, his freedom, his death, because we have to believe that those are somehow relevant for us as Christians. Those somehow make a difference. So, whereas classical Christology is ahypostatic, that is not hypostatic, Jesus is divine, but lacks a human metaphysical person. So our starting point has been Jesus is divine with the school in Alexandria. Jesus is divine, Jesus is divine, Jesus is divine. But it's almost like we lose the human being in all of that. And how is that helpful for those of us who are human beings? Jesus has somehow got to be like us, with the same challenges that we face. So when we look at the stories of him reaching out and including other people and loving and forgiving other people, those are things that speak to us more than words like ousia and immanent trinity and economic trinity, etc. It's time, said Karl Rahner, for us to get over this diaphysitic nature of Christology. This schizoid Christology that we've had between the human and the divine. It's time for us to find a way forward. We've used this language for a church for 1,500 years. I'm not proposing that we throw that out, but let's at least become aware of the history of those words so that we know where those words came from, and let's see if we can come up with a new Christology.